The silence of the apartment was deafening. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the hollow echo of absence. The air, once thick with the tension of unspoken words and unmet needs, now hung heavy with the ghost of what was. John ran a hand through his thinning hair, the weight of his wedding ring gone from his finger, but not from his mind. His reflection in the darkened living room window stared back, a stranger with familiar eyes. He'd spent years building a life he thought he wanted, only to realize it was a cage of his own making. The divorce, finalized just weeks ago, had been a relief, a ripping off of a band-aid that had festered for far too long. He'd told everyone it was amicable, that they'd simply grown apart. The truth, buried deep within him, was far more complex. He'd tried, he really had, to be the husband, the provider, the man he thought he was supposed to be. But the effort felt like a constant strain, a performance for an audience of one who never seemed pleased. There was a part of him, hidden in the shadows of his own heart, that yearned for something more, something different. But he'd shoved that part down, ignored its whispers, afraid of what it might mean. Now, alone in the apartment, the whispers were getting louder. The convenience store was more of a necessity than a destination. John needed milk, bread, the staples of a life he was still figuring out how to live. He grabbed a basket, the plastic digging into his palm, a small discomfort in a sea of larger ones. As he rounded the corner, his eyes fell on a rack of magazines, their glossy covers screaming for attention. His gaze snagged on one in particular, tucked discreetly behind a wall of fishing and car magazines. It featured a man, his eyes a piercing blue, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to hint at the toned chest beneath. Heat crept up John's neck as he quickly looked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He chided himself for even looking, for the unwelcome surge of something that felt dangerously close to desire. This was wrong, forbidden, everything he'd been taught to avoid. And yet his feet seemed rooted to the spot, drawn back to the magazine like a moth to a flame. He glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then snatched the magazine, shoving it under a stack of newspapers in his basket. His hands trembled slightly as he paid, avoiding the cashier's eyes, convinced that his secret shame was written all over his face. He practically ran from the store, the magazine a burning ember in his hand. Back in the safety of his apartment, John stood staring at the magazine, a war raging within him. One side, the side that had been cultivated for years, screamed at him to throw it away, to forget he'd ever seen it. The other, a fledgling voice he barely recognized, urged him to open it, to explore the feelings it stirred within him. He paced the length of the living room, the magazine clutched in his hand, a tangible representation of his internal struggle. Finally, succumbing to the insistent pull of curiosity, he sank onto the couch, the worn leather sighing beneath him. He opened the magazine, his breath catching in his throat at the images that greeted him. Men, beautiful men, their bodies strong and confident, gazed back at him. He felt a flush creep up his neck, his heart pounding in his chest. He'd never seen anything like it. The world he'd known, the world of carefully constructed masculinity and unspoken expectations, seemed to fall away, replaced by something raw, honest, and undeniably alluring. He spent hours poring over the pages, his fingers tracing the outlines of the models' bodies, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite articulate, feelings he didn't dare name.